Quilters Newsletter TV, the Quilters community, is brought to you by Husqvarna Viking, keeping the world sewing for over 140 years. Hi, and welcome to Quilters Newsletter TV, the Quilters community. I'm Mary Kate Karr-Petras, and I'm here today with McCall's Quilting contributing editor, Laura Roberts. Hi, Laura.
Hi, Mary Kate. I want to thank you for having me here today.
We're so happy to have you here today, and you're talking about
hand binding. I am a hand binding aficionado. I didn't used to be.
Oh, really?
And I always used to bind by machine because it was faster.
Even when you started?
Well,
quilting.
Absolutely, because
okay.
I thought it was, it was faster, and I thought it was going to be more sturdy. And then as the years have gone by, I've discovered that it's just really not my favorite way to bind. And so I'm going to share with you why I like binding my hand and the advantages it has. And while I'm saying that, I do still machine bind things like kids' quilts that you don't put your heart and soul into. They're quick and easy, and I'll just slam on a machine binding, and it's faster to give that way. But other than that.
Right, and I like to finish things by hand too. I'm working on perfecting my machine finishing skills as well. But generally speaking, I do appreciate a good hand
You know,
finish
there's
binding.
just something about it. When you have spent money and time and goodness knows stuck your fingers 1,000 times, and when you finish that by hand, there's some closure there. I don't know what it is. You get to pet it for the last time.
Exactly.
I want to show you, this is a quilt I made, gosh, 20-some years ago when I was still using machine binding as my usual. And I want to show you why I don't like it. Okay, if you look right here, now this was when
this is the front of the quilt.
This is the front. And this was back when what I was taught to do was you sew the binding to the back, excuse me, you flip it to the front, and then you top stitch it down. Well, that works if you're really good at top stitching.
Yeah.
And you can keep that exactly perfect. And some of this is okay. But even though it doesn't look that bad, you know what drives me crazy?
What?
See that little thing that pulls up? There's that teeny weeny bit. It just drives me crazy.
Really?
Sometimes I can catch lint in there. And so it's just my silly thing. But I'll show you a couple of other things that showed me this wasn't for me.
Okay.
First, if you look right here, when I was stitching from the front to do this, to put it in place, I missed. And and then you have to go back and you're trying to do it. Well, you can't do it from the front because then you have this double line of stitching. And the other thing is, this is a perfect example. Well, see, here's one where I missed a little stitching too. Do you see that?
Yeah, right there in the corner.
But if you feel that corner, it's hard. Do you feel that?
Yeah.
It's kind of, I have others that are so hard, and you can hammer on them and they're awful. And I learned that is something you can obviously deal with machine binding as well, but I finally learned how to not have corners like that.
Oh, really?
And so
something you can control a little bit better.
Oh, it's the silliest. It's really easy, and it's something that I show in my web seminar that I'm doing, and I just think it's just so easy, and I never knew. So let me show you a couple of other things, just to sort of let you know what my thinking has been. This is an antique quilt that I picked up.
I just have to show, just the drape on it.
I know.
It's just
it's that old, super soft, And I picked this up at a garage sale in Redmond, Washington for like $15. It was not, completely done. And what's interesting, what got my attention is that this has a hand-sewn binding. This quilt is over 100 years old because I had it appraised. It's still perfect. It's still on there. This has obviously been washed and not, in a easy way, and it's still fine. So that took care of my fear that hand binding wouldn't last.
This may not make it home with you.
Yes, it will.
Okay.
yes, I think it might. So this was my first real attempt at hand binding, and this quilt is, again, a gazillion years old. I won't tell you just how old. Well, I might. Anyway, this was my first real hand binding, and this quilt. If you feel this quilt, it's been washed and washed
yeah,
and washed and washed and washed. It has gone through everything. And if you look right there, you can't see the stitches.
No.
And this was my first one.
Yeah.
So, you know, it's not hard. It's really easy to do. It's just there's this sort of I guess a myth that hand binding is not fun and it's big work and all that. So,
Plop yourself down in front of the TV or something.
Put a cup of tea next to you.
You don't have to pay super close attention to it.
And if you have a football game on and someone's snoring in front of the football game, look how productive you're being. So,
do you speak from experience?
Yeah, yes, I certainly do. Okay, this is a binding by my best friend. This is a quilt she made for me. And now she used something a little different. In the quilt I just showed you, I used slip stitch, which is my favorite stitch for binding.
Okay.
She used a ladder stitch. You can't tell the difference by looking at it here, but a ladder stitch is one, it's by hand, and you go into the quilt backing first, and then you take a straight stitch over, and you do a stitch in the binding, and then you go straight across, and then down. And it's so useful for some things, you know, various, like when you're trying to bring a miter corner together, you may prefer that. But what's really interesting about it, now I always use a slip stitch except for special circumstances, and she tends to use the ladder stitch just because it's more comfortable for her.
Okay.
So that's
so there's no one right way to do this.
And there are really good things to learn. There are things, you know, it's really a good thing for a quilter to have these skills, because the other thing that if you know how to hand bind, you'll be able to do things like Prairie Points.
Now this is a quilt. I thought this was a vintage quilt when you first brought it on set, and you said it's not.
It's not. This is a quilt that was designed and made by a wonderful designer named Kathy Munkowitz, and this quilt's actually featured in the September-October 2015 issue of McCall's Quilting. Okay. And look what she did. These are wonderful. These are wovens. Aren't they great? Yeah. But if you don't know how to hand bind, if you don't have that skill, you're not going to really be able to do Prairie Points, because you have to get them right between the edges like that. And if you're trying to machine it down, you're going to have that machine stitching on the front, and it takes
that little like flange effect.
Well, you can get that edge, that little edge, but you also it just takes away from the sort of the finishing of the Prairie Points. And I love Prairie Points.
Yeah, this is really lovely. Let's turn it to the back too.
Isn't that pretty?
People can just see.
Isn't that beautiful?
It's a really flawless finish.
It really is, and well, the quilt is stunning.
This is beautiful.
It really is, isn't it?
Hand quilted too.
Hand quilted too. Well, you know, some people are awesome. Some quilters are just, you know, so much better than the rest of us. And this is a quilt. I just brought this one along because if you've ever wanted to make a quilt with a curving edge or scalloped edge or zigzag edge, they can be finished by machine. But if you finish it by machine, you can get this. Right here, do you see there's that little lip again? And it's just not as clean. You imagine how pretty this would be if you didn't see that lip at all.
Yeah.
And the other thing is, of course, it's so much easier to handle when you're down in those little valleys.
Yeah.
If you're doing if you can do it by hand and you can control each little stitch. So another good reason to learn hand binding is for things like scalloped edges.
Right.
So I just want to show you some of the things. The way I hand bind is I machine my binding to the front first.
Pretty typical.
Why not?
Yeah.
Right. It holds it all together.
Yes.
And then I turn my binding to the back. But one of the things, things that you need to know when you're putting that machine binding in place by machine, you need to think about where your seam allowances are in that binding. So you're not getting big, padding things up by layering them in some way. So that's a helpful thing to know. And then, of course, doing a proper miter so you don't have what I have. I have so many quilts that I did back in the day that have these corners. I'm not kidding. And so then I tried to iron them all flat so they got shiny. It's just horrible, horrible, horrible. And it's the stupidest little thing. Anyway, so I get that sewn onto the front, and then I turn it to the back, and I'm just showing you this little piece here. And this is just slip stitched in place, and then stitching that little miter bit together, and just carrying on like that. And it's really pleasant and easy. And it's so sturdy. You
Yeah.
know, so that took care of that myth for me. It's really sturdy. It lasts as long as machine binding, and it lets me do more things. You know. So
Opens up some of your finishing.
well, it does
potentials.
exactly. So I'm just going to show you a couple of my interpretation of things like Prairie Points. This is just something I threw together, and one of the things that was another thing I talk about in my web seminar. I have some little techniques that I've developed just because I love these things that make it really easy to make Prairie Points, and they're so fast. And I love these fabrics. So when I finish this, it's going to be adorable.
Well, it's a nice scrap buster.
Absolutely.
Or if you just can't get enough of the fabric, you can use more of it. More
use
is
more of it.
more.
Well, and it can carry the fabric out to the edge. So if you have a quilt that's just full of, gorgeous big prints, or maybe your quilt is pinks in the middle, and then you go into maybe a black border, well, you can bring that pink back out by putting it into a Prairie Point, and because it's actually between the layers, it's a completely different feel. It adds a dimension that very few quilts seem to have. So, and they're easy.
Yeah.
If you know how to hand bind, and it's just easy.
Yeah.
I never knew that. So I'm going to show you one last little thing here. That these are scallops or tongues or pennies. If you do a little mat, a little wool mat, you might have used, penny mat. And these are, they're both sides, like that.
It's not something you see very often these days.
No, it's not, and it is so attractive.
Yeah.
And one of the nice things about it, Prairie Point can catch things. You can get a little fuzz in a Prairie Point or whatever. These are completely closed.
Because they're finished
But
right on.
it looks like a ton of work, right? You're going to have to put a template on fabric.
Piecing.
Except not. Yeah, exactly. Because it's a lot of work. You're having to use the template. You have to trace it on the back of the fabric, and then you have to cut them all out. And you have to cut out too. Blah 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 blah. Well, again, because I love this, I have a little technique. I could make 8 of these guys in about 20 minutes.
Okay.
So I can do I can get enough for a whole quilt in an afternoon, a short afternoon.
Right.
And again, if you know how to hand bind, all these options start emerging, and that's another thing. This is another thing I talk about in my web seminar, is my little secret method.
And I can see something like this being used on a baby quilt.
Oh, absolutely.
Because some babies, like my first daughter, she loved tags. And so if you've got a kid who loves tags, this might be a good finish. And like you said, a hand binding is not by definition any less sturdy than machine binding.
No.
It depends on your skill, and how you do it. And so this could be a really nice finish for a baby quilt.
Well, and because these curves are actually machined, and it's not really machine piecing. Curve piecing. You're just making an arc.
I was kidding about it.
I know, but curve piecing can be really kind of a scary.
Yeah, again,
but it's not.
Doesn't have to be.
No, it doesn't. If you know how, and that's pretty much true of everything, isn't it?
Yeah.
And you're right. This adds a really fun thing. I like the idea of a baby feeling it. That's wonderful. So those are my thoughts on hand binding.
Fantastic.
I love it.
Well, we're limited for time in Quilters Newsletter community show, but you go into a lot more detail in your web seminar.
Yes, I do.
And you can go to quiltandsewshop.com and search for web seminars, and you'll find Laura's hand binding web seminar there. Find out more details, more techniques.
Well, and even things I haven't shown, like facings and why you might want a facing in a quilt, and extra wide bindings that go to the back, and rick-rack coming out like the tabs do here.
Okay.
Oh yeah.
Okay.
Because if you know how to do the hand binding, this world opens up.
It really
so I
does.
show everything and I share everything, and because I love this and I want other people to have the same fun I do.
Well, fantastic. Well, you're a great teacher, and thank you so much for coming here today.
Well, thank you for having me,
sharing this
Mary Kay. I appreciate it.
Our pleasure. Anytime. Anytime. Thank you for joining us. We look forward to seeing you next time. Bye-bye. Quilters Newsletter TV, the Quilters community, is brought to you by Husqvarna Viking, keeping the world sewing for over 140 years.